Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about season 1, or rather part 1, of The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which, first of all, I don't really know what the distinction is between a part and a season. I chalk that up to being just either how they go about sectioning things off is the biggest difference. Maybe it's like where a season kind of moves on with the story, taking the same characters through the same, like do new adventures and stories. Maybe like a part is supposed to be considered like it's the same, 100% the same story. Everything's working towards the same story. I don't know. That kind of still describes a season, I know, but I don't know. There might not actually be that big of a distinction. Maybe it's just, like I said, the way they just divide things up. I don't know. Either way, first of all, before I really get into it, I will kind of go into non-spoilers, so give you a little general thoughts about the season, and that is that it was great. I went into this not really knowing too much. I read a little bit about this like a couple months back when it first got announced about like the show being made, so I looked it up a little bit, but I didn't read too much, and me and comic books, don't really know comic books that much. So I knew obviously this was going to be like a little bit of a Riverdale feel to it, which it does, but it goes beyond that. So I don't want anyone to feel like, oh, is it just kind of like a copy of Riverdale? It's like, no, like it kind of has that little bit of that feel of Riverdale, but then like taking that supernatural step, obviously, and going further and just down a dark, like spooky and eerie horror angle. Like obviously it's getting played up a lot more in this show. I think they did a very good job, like kind of like the direction they're taking the story and just like Sabrina's whole struggle with what she's going through. Obviously, I'll dive into that a little bit more. But even in the trailers, they talk about basically her being half witch, half human. So that's kind of like her main issue. You kind of learn that about that immediately, like in the first episode. So it's not too much of a spoiler, but like that balance and that story ended up going directions I wasn't kind of expecting them to be. But still, I think overall, like a lot of how the show handles itself is very nice. It is a lot more bloody than I was expecting to be. Not in the like, oh, I'm like, there's so much blood, but it's like, no, I wasn't expecting the show to be even half as bloody as it was. So that kind of took me by surprise. But just like how far they went in like the whole supernatural kind of spooky angle. I mean, granted, you're like picking this from a comic book that's dark and spooky, so obviously you got to play that up. So in general, like it was great. If you have not seen it all the way through, I highly recommend you check it out. It is well worth your time. So that's just kind of my initial thoughts. Obviously, from this point on, I'm gonna go more into spoilers. So if you have not seen all of part 1 of The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, do not listen to this because I'm gonna be spoiling the entire thing. So you have been warned. First thing, too, I should talk about, too, I should have included this, but I'll still include it here anyway. It's the intro. I really appreciate the intro because it reminds me of iZombie. Like, if you've never seen iZombie, you really should watch iZombie. But basically, iZombie kind of has like a comic book open very similar to this, except iZombie takes basically the actors from the show and basically turned them into a comic book intro, whereas this kind of does a combination of two. It includes the actors as their respective characters in the intro, but they also take stuff from the comic book. I thought was pretty neat, kind of blending it all together. So I was like, oh man, that's a really nice touch. So I thought that was kind of pretty interesting. But other than that, obviously, first of all, let's talk about Sabrina's story, like the ups and downs to everything. It's kind of sad because in the end, like Sabrina was trying to find her own path, but literally everything and everyone was kind of conspiring against her, whether it be Wardwell, which her story ended up not being what I thought it was. Awesome that that's like Michelle Gomez, who is the actress who plays her, which obviously is Missy from Doctor Who, formerly the Master, then became Missy. God, I'm sorry. So that was pretty dope. But her character, I didn't expect it to play out the way it did, in the sense of like, oh yeah, like you're not the actual character. Because I was like, when she first pops up, I'm like, oh my god, there's she. And it's like, and then when she picked up that girl, I was like, okay, this is about to get sinister. You're about to kill her. It's like, nope, other way around. That girl killed her. It's like, oh, and she takes on her form. I was like, oh, okay, so that's what that whole deal is. I thought Wardwell was just kind of herself the entire time, and that was kind of, it's like, no, like that ended up being what it was. So I thought that was kind of already immediately changing my expectations, because I was like, oh, because I thought it was one way, turned out to be another. but also like Faustus. It's kind of interesting because both of them wanted the same thing. They wanted to get Sabrina to join the Church of the Night, kind of like the Dark Lord wanted them to, but they kind of kept their goals separate. And it seemed like as a series, as part one kind of progressed, it seemed like Faustus kind of cared less and less about doing it. I guess it's just like, I guess he decided just to leave it all up to her. Because it seems like everything that she was doing was obviously like everything that, well, we know her to be Lilith. Obviously, I'm gonna skip right into that. But everything Lilith was doing was to put Sabrina in a corner where she had no choice, and even to the point, like I feel like Faustus didn't even really know what was going on himself. I mean, obviously they kept their plans separate, so it's just kind of interesting. You were kind of working towards the same goal, but obviously it turns out for some different reasons. I'll kind of get into that a little bit more later on. But going back to just focus purely on Sabrina's story, or just kind of like every time she tries to do right, she, things just didn't work out. Obviously, like I said, things are just being conspired against her. Because I thought it was so beautiful of like how, like, for her, it's like she's trying to choose a different path. I am curious what a lot of that stuff was, because obviously she saw visions of her mom and her dad telling her to run away. But then at the same time, you're like, but then your mom and dad kind of led you down this path. I mean, her mom kind of helped her in some regards, because Diana, like, baptized her in, like, like a regular church. And then her dad signed her name in the book of Beast. And so it's like conflicting of like, okay, what's going on there? My initial thought when upon hearing all that, because I mean, it's got to suck for Sabrina too, because it's like everyone lied to you. Because now you find out that your dad basically sold you to Satan, like it was like 3 days after she was born. But it's like, oh, turns out your mom secretly had you baptized. But it's like, wait, so did she keep that from your dad? My initial thought was like, no. I was thinking they were in this together. Like before he did that, he made a decision to baptize her, but maybe not. Especially when you kind of find out later on what that was all about. It was because the price for them getting married, a warlock and a mortal, was have to give up their daughter. It's that situation of, I guess it's like they weren't expecting things. Like it's probably like, it's one of those prices where it's so far in the future you don't think about it. You get so caught up in now. They probably even tried their best to not have a child, but it just happened to be anyway. It might be the fact is that Satan knew, like he saw the future. He's like, oh, I know your baby's going to be born. So that's why he asked for this particular price. Or because maybe he knew this union would birth, essentially like using something like Supernatural, for example, the TV show, where it's like an angel and a human coming together creates a Nephilim. Maybe he knew a warlock and a witch coming together would create something powerful in itself, because it's just like, why Sabrina out of any witch? Her being a half-breed, you think would kind of take away from that, but maybe it created something inside of her that's something that exists in no other witch that makes her more powerful and has more potential than anyone else. Maybe, potentially, I don't know, that's me 100% guessing. I wanted to give her parents the benefit of the doubt, be like, oh, they thought 10 steps ahead of this situation. It's like, nah, that maybe they were just so short-sighted, in particular her dad. But I mean, to be fair, like she probably knew about the deal happened, like obviously when they got married, and the moment Sabrina, like, the time was coming, that's when the mom, Diana, snuck off and got Sabrina baptized. What was interesting is the aunts, each one went with the other. I thought that was kind of interesting. Zelda was with Edward, and Hilda was with Diana. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. So it's just kind of combinations of just everyone lying to you about everything. But not on top of all that, because even while dealing with that, Sabrina was trying to change the witch world into kind of different perspectives, like the whole harrowing situation, which is like, why is that allowed? It's like, it's almost like a huge hazing process, but it's like you're literally trying to kill people, which even Prudence and the others, like the weird sisters admit, it's like, oh yeah, we're going to kill you. I'm like, why are you such assholes? Also, side note, Prudence being the actress who plays Gaia from the 100, that's pretty dope. I noticed that immediately from like the trailers and everything, but it's like, why? I guess like their mindset is like, your dad was a traitor, so eventually you're going to be a traitor too, so why not wipe you out? Now it's like, you suck so much. I mean, they're just kind of like the prep, so they're just kind of like, we're better than you. You're, also because her being a half-breed, just, people look down on her in that regard too. Just because they in general look down on mortals anyway, so her being half-mortal just makes them hate her just that much more. because it's not only because of the union between your mom and your dad, it's also because your dad was kind of a big shot. And it's just like, I think people might even hold that against her too, because it's like, oh, your dad is like, oh, he was this big shot anyway. And then he also did this super controversial thing. So it's a complicated thing on its own. But like the whole harrowing situation, all those kids who had died from it. And it's like, yeah, kids that died from it, you just kind of did nothing about it. It's kind of shitty in my opinion. There was the whole feasting situation. Man, didn't see that coming. I thought that the history behind it was kind of interesting. The whole like Freya like sacrificing her body. It's like, oh yeah, that's a great story. I mean, it creates this motive, like not motive, but lesson of like no one which is more important than the whole. But it still kind of sends that messed up message of just like, yeah, but it's that thing of like every life matters too, you know? You shouldn't have to like willingly sacrifice people. I mean, apparently it had to stop because of Sabrina's dad, Edward, but obviously Faustus brought it back. Then that whole thing with like Lady Blackwood, Constance, yeah, her and the whole Prudence thing, that really shocked me. I was like, man, that's such a dick thing to do. It's like, oh, to ensure my kids take the throne, you need to die. It's like, I guess because she was kind of paranoid about everything, so she assumed one of them is probably his kids. She just assumed all of them were your kids. I love it because when the truth serum the truth cake was making him talk, and was it Dorcas and Agatha are like, are we your kids simultaneously? And he's like, no, you're not. You're just a bunch of orphans. He said it so heartlessly and casually. It's just kind of like, he's just like, oh, no, you're a bunch of orphans. What do you think, you're my daughters? It's like, and you see them kind of go, almost look like, oh, that's so sad. Because I was about to say, I was like, oh, are you all three sisters? No, she's the only biological child when it comes to Faust. That was kind of interesting. But I guess it was just more so probably like a combination of just her paranoia plus just, hormones for the baby made her kind of go down that route. But that was kind of interesting. I mean, that whole, like I said, the whole feast thing of like, oh yeah, getting all cannibalistic like that. It's like, that's insane. Even the fact is they were trying to stop it when it was all said and done, because it's like, hey, all this information came out at this dinner table. How about we don't say anything about it, but you get rid of it? And they're about to, when was it, Mildred slit her own throat and set that all in motion. I was like, jeez, man. And sacrificed herself. And she even had a smile on her face because like they actually liked the whole, because even Prudence, I can slightly understand her logic behind it, still messed up in the sense of like, hey, like if people eat me, I'm always going to be a part of every witch that ate me, which it's like your way of living on forever, and I'll be basking in the glory of the Dark Lord's heart, and it's such a high honor and stuff like that. It's still the fact of the matter is you're getting people to eat you, so that's still kind of a little crazy in the long run. But I mean, it's that thing, and I thought that was kind of an interesting conversation between Prudence and Sabrina of like, how is your faith any better than mine? Because it's like the whole Harvey situation of like his heritage, and like how can you have so much faith in him, but then you ask me to have question my faith in the Dark Lord? I mean, as we can tell, like things have been shady because there's that witch from Moon Valley that Wardwell, we'll just call her Lilith at this point in time, Lilith had taken them to. So it's kind of like, which we never circled back to that, but I guess it was for that story point, so that might not be something we ever circle back to, but still, that was just kind of showed you that, like, obviously not every high priest has the best of intentions. Even this one kind of has shady intentions to kind of force somebody. And I thought that was kind of the interesting thing, that everyone was lying and trying to make it seem like Sabrina had a choice, but it's like, no, it's more of a formality, especially because it's like, oh yeah, your dad signed your name in his book years ago and your aunt was there to witness it, so it's kind of like you were already his property. And Zelda was kind of hoping like, oh yeah, you'll accept the Church of the Night willingly, so it kind of would make it so you wouldn't find out that we did some shady stuff. It's like, okay. But like I said, getting back to what I was talking about, the fact of the matter is her trying to always do the right thing, trying to do what's best for Harvey in the sense of like, hey, this is the person you love. You cast this spell to try and bring his brother back, but it kind of turns into a zombie. I was actually surprised at the beginning when she ended up telling him the truth. I was like, wait, are you going to really stick with? Oh no, you wiped his memory immediately. I was like, okay. I even love that nightmare sequence of just kind of like, oh, like just how that situation played out for different people. I'm kind of, like I said, I do apologize because I'm all over the place, but what was it? Batty Bait being locked up in that. Because that never got answered of like, why would he put it in there, something that he knew someone was going to open up? To be fair, who did he think was probably going to open it up? He probably thought it was going to be Faustus, or maybe he thought it was going to be something that could be useful. You don't think in some shape or form that was meant to be something that Sabrina was supposed to use or take control of, like manipulate or control a demon in some shape or form? I feel like it was more so meant specifically target someone. Maybe it was meant to target Faustus, in the sense of for him to solve the puzzle, because he'd been working on it for like 20 years. Because even Nick was like, oh yeah, I spent about 3 years on it. So, but that whole nightmare sequence of like her being put into the Iron Maiden, I was like, that's brutal, dude. I was like, that's why like a lot of this show kind of made me go, holy crap, I wasn't expecting you to do that. The whole Zelda and Hilda's situation ended up being so interesting to me. I mean, for one, their like family dynamic is just interesting. The fact is that Zelda would constantly kill Hilda, which begs the question, has Hilda never once killed her sister? I think that should be, because like the way Zelda immediately puts it, kind of like, no, I've killed you multiple times, and that maybe at one point because it's taking you longer and longer to come back each time. At one point, I can't wait for the day for you to not come back at all, which is interesting because her nightmare ended with her killing Hilda, and she fell into a mess because Sabrina's the only one that knows what each one, like Sabrina, that Hilda, Zelda, and Ambrose dreamed about, but like obviously she tries to keep it like, oh no, like it was so fuzzy, I don't remember when in actuality she does. But it's so interesting because Hilda and Zelda's dreams are so opposite. Hilda is Zelda treats Hilda like shit, but would be lost without her. Like the thought that she permanently killed her sister broke her. She couldn't even help Sabrina because she was in such a mess, even though she's the one that's kind of like the control freak in the family of just kind of always controlling, giving out demands and stuff like that. She seems so cold-hearted, but when the time comes for it, when it comes to your sister, you turn into a blubbering mess. But then on the other side of things, you have Hilda being worried about stuck to her sister because it's like her sister's done nothing but berate her and tear her down her entire life, and it's just kind of like the thought of being stuck with her for the rest of her life. It's just, ugh. And then like Ambrose's whole situation of being stuck in house arrest like he was, and worried that he was just going to be alone forever. He was going to die alone, be alone, never having any friends, shut in, that's all his life would amount to, that he would have nothing but his solitude, his loneliness to be the only thing he has when death comes, which is super morbid and messed up. But I mean, that ultimately ended up being his fear. Cause we also, I'm skipping around, but like we also learned a lot more about witches in this, and the fact is that witches age very slowly. For example, Ambrose has been on house arrest for the past 75 years because we end up finding out later on, it's like, oh yeah, because he tried to apparently blow up the Vatican. I was like, wait, what? That's really interesting. But yeah, like he obviously ages super slowly. Obviously, if their powers are taken away, like there were in this part one, like obviously the aging starts kind of eventually catching up to him. Which that whole thing about literally Sabrina having to literally go to court for that. It's like, oh, she broke a promise to the Dark Lord and stuff like that. Even having to get a lawyer, that was an interesting twist. I just love how they handled that story like that. But yeah, everything going back to it, like Sabrina trying to do so many things, trying to help with the Tommy situation by killing Agatha. Like when she was like, oh, like she went to Prudence, is like, oh, I want revenge. I was like, okay. I was like, no. Are they just messing with her? Are they not really going to do this? Are they going to do this? Like, I don't understand. Like, are they messing with her? And then she went over and slit Agatha's throat, and I was like, wait, what? I was like, no, she didn't just do that. And it's like, yeah, she did. But then like the whole plan was to bury her in the Spellman yard and like resurrect her. I was like, because Sabrina trying to find the loopholes in what she is doing. But obviously, because it's so sad, because Lilith really got her with that whole like line. Because like when it was kind of like she had no choice but to present herself to Sabrina, because Betty Bat wasn't willing to listen, because it was like, no. The Spellmans had me locked up for so long. You know that it's interesting, and I'm just thinking about this in retrospect. that demon was as locked up as long as Ambrose was on house arrest. He was on house arrest a lot longer because he'd been there 75 years. The thing was locked up for 70 years. I just thought about that to the rest of the time. I was like, man, that's super messed up. Probably even more so reason why it probably hit you with the fears that you had. I thought that was kind of interesting. But what they ended up doing, like, obviously Lilith doing her deep manipulation, just one step at a time, this all being part of the Dark Lord's grand design, her like exorcising a demon from a mortal. Also, the next step, I think that was the whole her trying to resurrect someone kind of was like down the next step because it's just kind of like that was kind of pushing her over that line that she kind of wasn't supposed to or she shouldn't have crossed. And then just everything with Harvey too, because the whole point, obviously I kind of lost sight in that because it's like, yeah, everything she did was to kind of eventually break the bonds between all of them, cut her ties completely with the mortal realm, because that's what kept her from completely signing herself over, giving herself over to the Dark Lord. What I also think is interesting, and I don't remember if they really explained that or not, the whole dream that Sabrina had in the bathtub where she sees her mom and dad and there's two babies. There's one that's supposedly, I would assume is Sabrina, and there's another one with horse feet. I guess that's supposed to represent the fact is that they are tied together. Like from the moment she was born, the moment she was born, the Dark Lord was born right beside her. I mean, obviously he existed anyway, but like that he was born, like he was there, a mirror image. As she's grown up, he's been by her side the entire time. Maybe that's what that's supposed to represent. Because we saw the goat feet. He's the only one with the whole goat feet, like the whole goat aesthetic. I wonder like how much stuff uses that goat aesthetic for Satan. You see it pop up every once in a while, but still. I'll admit too, I wasn't expecting her to have actually signed her name at the end of it. Even though like everything was leading to it, I was like, something's going to happen to make it so that she doesn't. It's like, nope. The bad guys technically full on win. They get what they want at the end. I wasn't expecting. I thought like Sabrina would come out in the end and win. You thought it'd be kind of, and I think that's kind of a cool thing with this is it does seem like in the end, it's not completely over. The fight is far from over, but the bad guys have technically won. They've kind of got what they wanted, like especially in Lilith's case. It's kind of interesting too because Lilith is on the impression like, oh, she's going to be a great foot soldier for the Dark Lord, and then I'm gonna rise up and be his queen. I am the first wife of Adam. I was saved by the fallen angel, but her bird Stalis was kind of like, well, how do you know he isn't preparing Sabrina to be his queen? And then she's like, well, even if that is the case, Sabrina will be easy enough to deal with, which is interesting. I mean, to be fair, we still don't know what the full scale of Lilith's powers are. And she also killed Stalis too, which is kind of sad. I mean, I wonder is he dead, or did she just do that just long enough to shut him up? Probably just dead, because after everything played out the way it did, she probably doesn't need him anymore. Plus him even putting that out there, which is maybe the reason why she got super pissed, is because there was some part of her brain that was like, yeah, there is some probably truth to that. So I think this goes beyond just having like some powerful foot soldier. It's like, no, Sabrina's supposed to be his everything. That's because it's like, for just like I said, there's a lot of powerful witches, so why her specifically? Why go to such extremes unless you want to make her yours in all completely, not just being like a weapon for you, but to be by your side? Because I guess it's with her by his side, there's nothing that can stop her. Because what's interesting? We focused 100%, like obviously we're balancing like the mortal side of things and the witch side of things. Like, so we saw the dark side of things, but we never really got the full on like opposite approach to that in this universe. Like what is kind of like on the other side of like, is there a light counter? We talked about it a little bit here and there when it comes like to the Church of Light or whatever, but it's like, is there like a group on the other side that's equivalent? Will it be like pastors and priests and stuff like that? Like there was no like human equivalent, like on the side of mortals in that regard. There was no equivalent to witches when it comes to the Church of Light. You get what I'm trying to imply? Well, I mean, what I'm trying to say. So it's just kind of interesting. Maybe that's something that kind of will be handled or tackled in the future. I don't know. I also thought it was kind of pretty nice aesthetically how like in the end her hair is kind of going like white, blonde, kind of platinum. And I think that obviously that's more reflective of who she is in a comic book. I mean, maybe that's what happened to make her hair go white in a comic book. Or maybe that's just an aesthetic choice to be like, now it's kind of, I don't know. There might be a story reason why her hair is like that in the comic books. Because I think typically, like, I think even in the intro, they kind of show you like a very old school depiction of Sabrina in the comic books. She was a blonde, so maybe there is a reason behind that. And we also only got a tiny bit a look at it, but it does seem like in this universe, if you've ever seen the TV show Grimm, it seems like witches kind of look almost like hexen beasts to a certain regard. Like like obviously they look like mortals, but that hides their true form. Because I'll dive into it more. But Roz saw Sabrina for what she really looked like. She kind of had this like, I don't know if that was her kind of seeing Sabrina's like true form. What was interesting is she had a lasso around her neck, which I'm curious, like rope around her neck. Is that supposed to implying like, oh, her strings constantly being pulled? Because the thing is, like, even with that form, like, is that just because she was half witch? Like, if she was a full witch, would her form look any different? Because we saw it with the Weird Sisters earlier on, in the sense of like, we saw glimpses of it when they were getting it back at the bullies that were bullying Susie, which those guys are complete and utter assholes. They kind of got what they deserved. I like that the girls kind of blackmailed them into tricking them into making out with each other. I was like, oh, how you had? I was like, oh, that was interesting, and then scaring the crap out of them. But nevertheless, but that whole like real form thing, I'm wondering, will that be something you ever see more going for? Because it seemed like with everything and everyone in this show, it seems like that's something they break out every once in a while. I mean, I'm sure budgetary reasons is another reason why you don't show it a lot, but I guess it's something that it's supposed to be like this special thing you probably see every once in a while. It's not meant to be like an everyday thing. Potentially, I don't know. So, and since we're talking about Sabrina and stuff like that, I do want to talk about, obviously, everyone's situation played out so different. I wasn't expecting to be like, oh, technically, like, Sabrina is this, like, she's a witch, she's a half human, but how much that other side of things, the like witch side of things, kind of influenced the other people in her life. Not her directly, but indirectly. In a sense, like Harvey's whole situation of ever since he was like a kid, when he was 8 years old playing hide and seek in the mines, he ended up seeing the Dark Lord way back then, and it freaked him out about the mines. So there's that connection, and we don't know how deep that runs. Like, whether that really becomes anything. It might not mean anything. It just might be the fact is that Harvey's kind of been touched by this like supernatural ever since he was young, and it's just only right that it all kind of circles back to, I mean, to be fair, Greendale has the history it does anyway with like witches and stuff like that. But then there's like Roz's situation of kind of along the same lines of witches, like her family being cursed by a witch, they're losing their sight. Because I thought like, oh, that was just kind of like a sad thing, like the whole like her trying to get books read because she's trying to take as much time with her sight as she can. But it's like, oh no, something cool comes about you losing your sight. The question, and I thought it was kind of an interesting thing, because even her grandma was like, honestly, I don't know if the cunning is like comes about because we're going blind, this curse that's on us, or does, us going blind, like the cunning rising to the surface, is that just because it was always there, just going blind, and the curse just brought out what was already there? So there is that, and like, so basically she can see the past, the future, as well as seeing the truth behind things, because she saw what Agatha and Dorcas had did about the whole Tommy and Harvey situation. And then there's the whole she saw Tommy's also, and then once again she saw Sabrina for who she really was. So that was kind of an interesting thing. And then there's a whole thing with Susie, like seeing her dead ancestor Dorothea, which I'm curious, like, is like her whole thing like, oh, I see ghosts? Or is it going to be a situation of, is it only ghosts that are related to her? Can she see like the ghost of her bloodline or something like that? Because the only ghost she saw this season was Dorothea. So I'm curious to see how far back that goes. Or is like Dorothea the only person that she sees? You know what I mean? Like, I was not expecting her friends to have like these supernatural connections. It's not like they're normal humans either in that regard. So, I mean, the only one that's kind of normal is Harvey, but I think Harvey's, well, because we also found out that Harvey's whole situation of like, oh yeah, he comes from a family of witch hunters, which is interesting because like his grandfather is Gerard from Argent from Teen Wolf. I was like, what? Papa Argent's dad? What? That's crazy. So there's that. I think another thing was Doctor. I forgot his name. He was also was it season 2 of 12 Monkeys? Yeah, I think that's the only season he was in. So there's that. But nevertheless, which even that we kind of get a little bit of. I'm sure that's something that gets explored more. But see what I mean? Like, even the people in her lives kind of have their own things in their own history. Because, you know, like I said, it kind of goes back to the whole Lilith manipulation. How much of that does she probably didn't know about all of that ahead of time. She knew about definitely Harvey's whole situation because she tried to take advantage of that situation. Because it's like, oh yeah, like using his hunting, like his family being a bunch of hunters. I mean, that's what set Dorothy and Dorcas and, Agatha off about killing them, which is kind of messed up because they're like, oh, you killed because they killed this familiar. It's not like they knew. They were just hunting what they thought was a deer. Like, it's not their fault. I think you can't really hold that against them, which that in itself is such an interesting thing. Like, I was wondering because I don't know what the storyline for familiars typically are. Like, I think in some regards it's like it's a person who was originally a human who becomes an animal. In this case, it's goblins, and goblins look weird. But it seems like they can go back to their goblin form at any point in time. But basically, Salem is a goblin. In that regard, but his deal with Sabrina is different. Like, it's not like a master servant situation. It's more like a partnership. You help me, I help you type of thing. Which is also interesting too that he doesn't actually talk. Which is I was like, are you going to give him a voice? But I guess they didn't want to do too much like the sitcom because they probably felt like that would have made it a little too much like the sitcom. Would have had to be all puppety and stuff like that. Because I thought maybe you could do the whole telepathy thing being a manifestation of it. You don't have to literally have it talking, which is interesting. They do that most of the part until like the final episode where like Stalis is talking to her at the end, and then it's like, oh yeah, all of a sudden I can talk now. And I'm like, why do that, especially at the very end? Like, I guess it's because it only popped up for that one line of dialogue, so I guess it was just to give us that instance of that, or maybe that means in the future they're going to mess around with that a little bit more. I don't know. I'll admit, Harvey handled that whole situation about her being a witch a lot better than you thought he would, especially when it was all said and done. Like, obviously he told her to keep her distance, but it's like, even he couldn't even hate her. Even like, he even says like, oh, I promise. He had his smooth talking moments even early on because it's like, oh, if I could, like, if it meant like I had to be with you, I wouldn't sacrifice our relationship just to be able to fly because there is no flying without you. And I'm like, oh, the moment he said that earlier in the season, I was like, you smooth talker, you, which also interesting enough, just, I've never watched the show a lot, but it's the thing I know him from. Isn't the actor's name Ross Lynch, who, plays Harvey, from, Austin and Ally. That's what I know him from, so. But, I mean, in general, like things are complicated. Between them. I even love at the end when Nick shows up to like, hey, I'm guarding your place here. And it's kind of like, so he was like, yeah, I'm a friend, Sabrina. He's like, so what kind of friend is like, even though you're kind of in a situation you still kind of getting a little jealous. So I thought that was kind of adorable in that regard. So it is still sad though, that in the end, he had to be the one to end up killing his brother. He kind of had to take that burden on himself. And I think that's not something you kind of come back from, but I'm so interested. Like, obviously, his grandfather probably knows more about the whole, like, them being witch hunter things. It makes you wonder, how much does their dad know? Oh, my God, since I'm talking about his dad, how much of a piece of shit is his dad? His dad, like, oh, you want to work at that comic book store? You better get your ass in that damn mine. It's like, why are you being such a dick? Then there's the whole thing about, like, oh, yeah, my son Tommy, he loved the mines. And, like, Harvey was like, no, he didn't. He's like, what are you talking about? It's like, he didn't love the mines. Just because you want to keep up this stupid family legacy, you made him and me work in the mines, even though if it wasn't for you, he wouldn't have been there in the first place. And then he gets pissed at Harvey later on, it like, oh, you're about like, what was it he was saying? It was like, oh, how dare you embarrass me in front of everybody like that? It's like, you were such an asshole. And then he literally was about to punch Harvey too. And it's like, their dad just constantly shows himself to be a piece of crap. I mean, their mom never came up in conversation. I'm wondering, is that like a big part of that or not? But it's like, because that's sad too, because for Harvey, it's like his brother, Tommy, was the only good thing for him. It's like, because he blames himself because it's like, Tommy could have gone off to Notre Dame to like play. Like, he got a, what was it, like a scholarship or something there for like football or something like that. He could have gone, but he stayed behind because he was trying to make sure that Harvey was okay, because he wasn't trying to leave Harvey alone with his dad. And so that's why like Harvey even blames himself for everything. it's hard to say whether you, because the whole argument, it's like, oh, Sabrina should have left everything alone. She shouldn't have done what she did because that led to, Tommy coming back. And even like, Harvey was like, oh, you should have just left him be. But it's like, you were in so much pain. I mean, and also Sabrina was kind of right in the regard of like, it wasn't normal means that led to him dying. It was witches getting involved, which I was actually surprised that Dorcas, I'm confusing. Yeah, Dorcas threw Agatha under the bus super hard, which, truth be told, is Agatha deserved it because it's like she was the one that was pushing for it. Even Dorcas was kind of being like, I don't know about this. And when it was all said and done, Agatha was all like apologetic when she was coming out of the ground. And you see her later on when all three weird sisters are connected, they're good again. It's kind of like, man, you literally were hanging on to death's door after all of this, and you're up here now, like back to being kind of like queen bees of everything. So I thought that was kind of interesting. What I am curious about, was it 100% the Soul Eater grabbing Tommy's brother, or was that, I felt like that had to be something that was connected to Lilith, but maybe not. Because it's just like she made it, but I guess before they could get through, it devoured him, and it just kind of like sucked. It was also interesting too because she ran into her mom. Because like for her mom had no idea what Edward had done, because she was like, after the baptism, it's like, oh, we were told our baby, she was like under the impression that Sabrina had died. So was that something Edward was keeping from her? I guess it was like, no, this way she doesn't know about the fact is that I still handed her over to the Dark Lord. Which that's an element that kind of got hinted at throughout the entire part, was like, oh yeah, your parents' death wasn't an accident, which, looking less and less like that. But everyone seems to be in general thinking that it was an accident. But with all this stuff at play here, there's no way there had to be more, like everything had to play out to a certain extent. Like it makes you wonder how much was all planned out by the Dark Lord. There's kind of going back to focus on him is Ambrose. That Connor storyline didn't really go anywhere. I'm curious, is that something we'll circle back to? Because it's like, oh yeah, Connor was apparently killed potentially by witch hunters, or it just seemed like they never really expressed it. It was like, oh yeah, it was witch hunters, because there's the whole thing with his iguana familiar, never got any information out of him. His parents ended up both committing suicide. Apparently it's like, that looks suspicious as hell. Like, I don't know what that is, because his parents had just found like some of his occult stuff and they were going to bring it over, but before they could, they ended up dying. So it's like, nah, that's too suspicious with the timing and stuff like that. It's also kind of crazy because Ambrose hooks up with Connor's, I guess, on and off person, that being Luke. I was kind of suspicious at first because I'm like, who's to say he's not behind it? But it seems like he's not. Then there's a whole situation of whatever it is that Faust has going on at the end. I chalked that up to Faust being like, oh, we're going to take over this. Like, it's going to become a male-dominated thing. Like, we're going to run the, like, magic world in some regard. You even have Ambrose being like, okay. Because it's nothing but dudes there, so it's like, okay. Because even Zelda was worried about that. She was like, the fact of the matter is that he had an eldest daughter come out first. She's like, I'm afraid of what that could mean, what that would mean for her. So the only one left is his son, Judas. And so that begs the question what that's going to turn into. Because now, I guess what that might potentially mean, because now we have two legitimate heirs for the throne, and so it's like technically it belongs to her because she's the oldest, and now it's going to turn into that thing of like the boys, like Faust and all the boys rallying behind Judas, while the witches, most likely Zelda, because she's the one that's going to be mainly taking care of the twin daughter. So that's definitely going to be an interesting thing. I also love in that regard, it's like Hilda being like, I'm moving out. I was like, oh, you're moving. She's like, out the room. I don't know whether she was really going to be like, I'm moving out, but it's probably more so was always going to be like, I'm moving out the room. Because Zelda's like, oh, together we can. It's probably like, no, I've kind of realized I don't, Like I said, Zelda kind of wants to appreciate Hilda a little bit more, but Hilda's like, nah, I need to get away from you, just because it's like we've been together so much of our life. You've always kind of treated me like crap. It turns out that even like Zelda harrowed freaking Hilda back in the day, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, she's like, you were ruthless, and she's like, oh, I'm so sorry to what I did back then. Like I said, when it comes to her sister, it's a complicated relationship. All the times you killed her and everything, and also the fact of the matter is, you get a little sentimental at times when it comes to her in that regard. but at the same time, you'll immediately go back to kind of treating her like crap the next. So it's just kind of up in the air. So I think she was trying, but eventually, like, Hilda's probably like, I'm not really want to try right now. Because her and Dr. Cerberus are a thing, which begs the question, what was up with that whole kiss thing at the end and his eyes changing? So that either has to deal with the fact is that maybe it has something to do with the fact is that Hilda's died multiple times. Because I think this is the only person she's been with in a very long time, potentially. So maybe it has something to do with the fact that she's died over and over again. Or maybe it has something to do with the fact that Dr. Cerberus is something else. Which we don't know too much about, like, what else exists in this world. Because Ambrose references, like, Luke, ask if Luke's a vampire. Turns out he's a warlock. But it's like, does that mean vampires exist in this world? I'll really quickly, just kind of a little nod. I do like the fact is they've mentioned it by name 2 times throughout the entire show. You can't help but notice. They may have mentioned it more, but I do clearly remember them definitely bringing Riverdale up twice, which does make me wonder, like, because obviously Greendale has popped up in Riverdale. Obviously, some like, yeah, stay away from Greendale. It's kind of a weird place. It's kind of all that's been hinted at. So like, I get a feeling like, yeah, they'll be referenced to each other. They probably do take place in the same universe. It's just they're not going to cross over. They're going to probably keep them 2 separate universes, because if you keep them occupied in the same world, it's going to get like murky, because it's like they probably don't want Riverdale to become that. And so if there was ever any crossover, it would probably be a situation. I don't know, because that'd also be all cross platforms too, because that'd be Netflix to like the CW. I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but I don't know if they would. But yeah, I'm curious is that what that, like, because in the long run, kind of circling back to it, what's the whole Ambrose thing? It seemed like that's why Faustus wanted Ambrose there, because it's just kind of like, because we never got a clear, full story on everything related to Ambrose, because we got introduced to the fact is the person he was following at that time, it's like his dad died at such a young age from witch hunters, and because of that, he kind of kept looking for a father figure until he came across Crowley, which is interesting just because there's a Crowley on the TV show Supernatural, which I'm sure there's some commonality between that. Like, I'm sure there's like historic figures known as Crowley potentially, that whole train of thought. But he wouldn't give up his co-conspirators, which Faust was kind of all for. And now you're kind of like, oh, that's why, because you're kind of doing your own thing, your own kind of like mutiny march. And so like you figured you'd have a person like Ambrose, which doing that would also mean going up against the only other family he has, which includes his cousin Sabrina as well as his 2 aunts. So you could definitely tell at the end he wasn't all for that situation. I am curious also what happens with the whole Prudence situation. Obviously, Faustus has his whole like, oh, you're my daughter thing, sure, but the fact of the matter is I've got my legitimate child. Not realizing there's the other one, which I think that's going to play a role too, because Prudence will probably do whatever it takes to protect her sister, because it's like, yeah, you kind of kept on the outside. You're kind of like, there'd probably be danger if you were found out, and also being kind of the quote unquote illegitimate child or quote unquote bastard child would probably make it even more complicated. I mean, hell, who knows how many other kids, Faustus might actually have out there, I am curious to know, like, going forward with Sabrina's situation of now that she has embraced her full witch side, which, like, whoa, it's like, well, what else is she capable of, summing up hellfire like that? Because the 13 witches were like, one of them was like, yeah, only 3 witches have ever done that, and only devils are able to do that, which I guess speaks volumes about Sabrina's whole situation. Because there's certain aspects that came up about Sabrina's character that we see in the intro to the show, which I've also seen pictures of, panel-wise from comic books. I'm curious about, like, you see the whole skull face thing. So I was like, now that she's kind of embraced more of her witch side, does that mean, like I said, that manifestation of her, like her true form, is that changed? Is that what that's about? Or is that something else entirely? But also, like, now that she's embraced more of this power, what does that mean about her human side? It still exists, obviously. Like, obviously it's her giving up her human life, but not giving up that human side of her existing at all. She will always still be a half-breed. I don't know if there will ever be any way for her to completely kill that off and become a full-blown witch or not. It is kind of interesting at the end, she's rolling with the weirds, but I guess because for them, it's like, oh, not only did you save the day and all that, you're also like full-blown witch, you're here. Obviously, we see things kind of hitting off between her and Nick, which is a complicated thing. I think Nick, he already liked her, and now like things are probably going to heat up between them because she's leaving her human life behind, and there's a whole Harvey situation. Just the complications all on its own. Because it's kind of interesting because the lawyer was Daniel Webster had told her like the price for paying. His story was kind of messed up. I should have talked about it earlier when I brought it up, but like how, oh yeah, he asked to be the best lawyer in the world, and because of that, the devil's little like snafu, like fine print of like, oh yeah, and now, but that means you have to represent the worst people in the world who've done horrendous, terrible atrocities, and because you're the best lawyer in the world, you're going to set them free. And said one of those people he saved ended up getting freed and proceeded to do to his daughter what he did to other people. And it's like, oh gosh, that sucks, dude. So obviously Sabrina's price initially is her human life. That was kind of the whole point, to make her have no choice but to cut ties with all of that. Now she kind of has to come like whenever the Dark Lord says like, oh, when I call for you, you better show up. That's just how this whole thing works. So like I said, there's a lot of this we're still kind of missing, a lot of the finer details about her parents, like what their whole situation is. I mean, aside from meeting her mom, but her, like I said, her mom fills it in by being like, I thought you died apparently. You know, they told me you were going afterwards and stuff like that. So I wonder, will that limbo situation be something we ever tackle again? I mean, it's not something you really need or rather want to like really deal too much with, because it's like, you know, it could kill you. They didn't talk about witch limbo too much. Obviously, that was human limbo. I would assume witch limbo is kind of similar. It's kind of interesting because it's only for people who died before they were supposed to, as well as those who weren't baptized. Interestingly enough, there was part of my brain that was going like, oh, well, I guess because she probably was baptized, so she moved on. But I was like, there was part of my brain that was wondering, like, when she was first walking up to her mom, I was like, is she going to run into the real Wardwell and then immediately find out, like, oh my God, she's actually, wait, what? Who's this person that's been by my side all this time, blah, blah, blah. I thought that was going to be it, but it turned out not to be the case, so. I didn't talk about it. Obviously, it's come up, like, a little bit in some of the stuff I brought up, but, like, this show had a very, like, interesting humor side to it as well, with some of the stuff that went down that kind of took me by surprise. Like I figured it wouldn't be all like super dark or whatever. Obviously, like the whole satanic angle like went a lot further than I thought it would. Like I didn't know like there'd be like massive storyline revolving around that. Like the whole, I don't know. I didn't know what to, like as I going into this really to what to expect. But yeah, it was kind of funny on some parts too, just some of the interactions between the characters and stuff like that. Like the whole Zelda and Faustus situation of like them hooking up and Zelda being like, what's happened to the situation? He's like, oh, basically they whip each other. And it's like, oh, you give me 30 lashes, I give it to you. And she's kind of like, sure thing. It's like, wow, you've never seen Zelda like that. And just kind of like their thing between them. Even at one point when his wife was pregnant. Because I love him being like, oh yeah, like, Lady Blackwood hasn't touched me in all that time. And Zelda's like, no. And he's like, oh, yes. Like, he was so broken by it. I thought that was like, what? Get out of here. Because at first I was like, oh, man, Zelda, he's just using you as a booty call, which I guess to a certain extent he is. And Zelda was kind of okay with their arrangement and stuff like that. But then going as far as being, I want you to be the godmother to my children. Okay, which now in retrospect, it's like, oh yeah, she kind of filled out that role to a certain extent. That's definitely going to get complicated because you're supposed to be taking care of the daughter, which you've secretly hidden away, while also being there for her son. Well, for his son, but to be fair, you know, with what he's got planned right now, it's kind of like, yeah, he's kind of doing his own thing. So probably won't have to really worry about that too much, but she's still kind of keeping up her end of the deal by taking care of the daughter. Been like, oh, be their godmother and stuff like that. That was kind of a trip to me to he would suggest that. So do with part 2 of this, because obviously everything has changed. Obviously Sabrina's relationship with her friends, her mortal friends, has changed, and now she's kind of cutting ties with them. So does that mean we'll see less of the mortal world? But to be fair, they've kind of got their own things going on that we still got to dive more into. And obviously her family dynamics changed a little bit because Hilda and Zelda's in their situation. Then there's Ambrose. Then it's the whole situation of what Lilith's got up her sleeve. This whole, what the Dark Lord has up his sleeves too. What ends up happening in that regard. Plus more, like I said, more information about her parents. The whole witch hunters, like I said, we dived into that a little bit. But like full on witch hunters, we never actually saw any this season or part. So The thing I'm curious the most about, like, what this full-on change has done to Sabrina's personality, because even her winking at Nick like that at the end, that doesn't seem like that would even be her, because she has a very shy-ish, timid personality. It's kind of interesting because even with the whole thing going down with Harvey, that kind of, like I said, that surprised me. Really, what did surprise me, and it surprised Lilith too, is like, even with that all said and done, after all the truth came out, like, Roz and Susie still had her back 100%, so can't completely sever that tie. But I mean, obviously it has, now that she's kind of gone full, lost her, kind of cutting away her humanity. And the big question to see is how much of her is still intact, even though she's kind of become like this, that there's probably still going to be that human side of her, that humanity will always be a part of her, no matter how much other people try to cut it away from her. So I'm curious to see what the dynamics are like going forward into like part two. Whenever that ultimately potentially comes out, I'm sure that also is determined by how well this season does, or part does. So, but really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.